Hey, this is Troy Taylor with the Championship Football Coaches Clinic. We have Paul Crowley on today, the head football coach at Christopher Newport University. Thank you for coming on, Coach.
I appreciate being here. Looking forward to talking.
So, I remember Paul when he played football in Virginia Beach at Lansdowne High School. Were you on the '04 state championship team?
Yep. That was my senior year, so got to be there when Lansdowne started as a program, and 2 years under Robert Jackson. Then Coach Beatty came in and lost the state championship my junior year. Got our tails kicked by Westfield and Eddie Royal and a bunch of those guys. Then fortunate enough to come back our senior year and have the run I think everybody dreams of as a senior football player.
Yeah, at City Stadium. And we played after y'all when I coached at Meadowbrook. And we actually went into the locker room with Robinson during that lightning delay. And their coach was so upset that another team was in there with them. I don't think Coach Beatty was probably too upset.
No, that was a weird deal because it was a thunderstorm in December. And we head into the locker room with North Stafford, and you're just kind of looking around at these guys like just staring at each other, waiting for the second half to start. And I was really worried we were going to come out flat after that because it felt like a pretty long break. And I think they were going to go for it to do something, and they ended up jumping off sides the first play, and the rest we kind of just rolled.
Yeah, man. So you played for Robert Jackson, and Coach Jackson, he had gone to Norfolk State to coach, and then Coach Beatty came in there. Coach Beatty now he's the receiver coach with the Chargers. I know they brought in a new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, but he's going to be fine no matter what. Talk a little bit about playing for Coach Robert Jackson, and then transitioning with Coach Beatty as your head coach in high school.
Yeah, Coach Jackson had just came from Bayside, and they'd had some successful teams over there. And he was, just old school disciplinarian, tough on you as you're going to be. And I think, those first 2 years, he really built a lot of the toughness of the program. And we had a bunch of young kids that were having to play as freshmen based off the school being new. So that was kind of the 2 years where we really had a lot of trials and tribulations. And then, obviously, Coach Beatty coming in was pretty cool. My brother had played for him at Salem with Zon Burton and Mike Beal and a bunch of those guys. So I already knew what I was getting into. And he's just the biggest thing I learned, in my years with him, and I still have a pretty good relationship. We still talk a couple times a year, was to be authentic to yourself as a coach. I had always grown up under the Robert Jackson coaches that were yellers and screamers. And I knew I wanted to coach, but I also knew that wasn't going to ever be me. But that wasn't Coach Beatty. He was, somewhat quiet, very confident in how he presented himself. And I realized you can coach and be whoever you want to be. Just as long as you're authentic, the kids will buy in.
Yeah. So just thinking a little bit about, Coach Beatty, and I went to a coaching clinic. It was he was still coaching at Salem, and it was at Hampton University. Bill D spoke, and then he spoke, and he told the guys in the clinic, it's probably about 40 people in there, 50 people in there. He said, we don't practice running the ball. And these guys, they were giving him such a hard time. I mean, if you ever went to a clinic and where the coaches in the audience had the chalk last, it would have been these guys. I mean, they hated him because he was so young, and he was so unconventional. But I mean, that style of offense that y'all played in, I mean, it's the norm today. So the story I hear Chris Beatty say is when he first met Percy Harvin, he said, man, I got Michael Jordan in cleats. So can you talk a little bit about that, Coach Beatty and being around Percy Harvin, one of the all-time greats in Virginia?
Yeah. Coach Beatty, we ran that spread, no huddle offense that, like you said, has become much more popular nowadays. But back then it was something new. And really, he just did a great job, and I try to do this today, of just window dressing. We didn't actually have a ton of plays, a ton of offense, but we made sure it looked different to the defense. Percy was, special. I think you're, spoiled at a young age of having to see that, and we knew him growing up in Pop Warner and all that stuff. His sophomore year, my junior year, he was kind of our third receiver.
Yeah.
We had Mike Mayers, who went to Elon, and Jeremy Gilchrist, who played at Tech. So he was kind of the third option on those teams. And then, his junior year, he just took off. And, everyone remembers him on those teams, and he was phenomenal. I would say the thing he has that I still haven't seen anywhere I've been is his zero, start to get to full speed as quickly as he did was, I don't think something that's ever been done by many people, period.
I mean, he's the greatest same side counter, shotgun runner of all time. I mean, they put that in the middle of the game at Florida and just handed it to him. And yeah, man, I mean.
Yep, I vividly remember that play actually because, I was watching it all and I knew I wanted to be a coach. It was about 80 yards, I think, maybe South Carolina or somebody. It kind of made me have a fascination with those positionless players, right? The guy that could be a running back / receiver / do all these different things, which I think is really how football is going when you're looking at it at the college professional level. Is the more versatility you have with guys, the better. So you can be in 21 and be in any formation, or you can be in 20 and be in any formation. That's pretty hard to stop. And I think he was one of the initial guys that really revolutionized that side of it.
Yeah, so I remember when he was a sophomore, y'all played LC Bird at LC Bird, and I think I was coaching at Meadowbrook, and I'd gone over to Bird to watch some tape on Lansdowne or something, and I called Ray Gatlin up, and because I played college ball with Ray at Clinch Valley College. Well, I didn't play, but I was on the team. And I called Ray and I said, "Man, how fast is that Devon Simmons kid?" Because I mean, he was like what y'all said, like a tailback and middle linebacker.
Yeah,
and he was like, "Troy, number 11 is way faster than him." And I remember going into halftime. I can't remember what route it was. It was probably smash number 3 receiver down the middle of the field, and Bird's playing cover 3, and that free safety ain't covering Percy Harvin over the top. So I guess that was your junior year.
Yep. Yeah, we played LC Bird both years in the regional championship. We thought we'd get Hermitage, and LC Bird made it out. And Coach Bidwell had some good – they were pounding the ball, physical teams. That was a close one. I think it was tied going into the half, and Percy made that play.
Yeah.
And then we kind of rolled from there. But, yeah, he was just special. And, you talk about Devion Simmons. I was thinking about this today knowing I was going into this call, but it's funny how things can come full circle. So I vividly remember Coach Jackson giving us a speech when I first got there about these kids at Bayside that, run in the streets and never graduate high school and do all that stuff. And he was warning us not to be those guys. He said every class from when he played to when he coached at Bayside, there's always that guy. And, there were other guys in Lansdowne too, but I think Devion's probably the biggest example of unrealized talent. It was Percy level. And I had a conversation with Coach Beatty about him, funnily enough, 2 years ago, right before he ended up getting murdered. But just you hate to hear those stories, and I'm sure you've seen them in your career too, of guys that could have done anything they wanted, but couldn't get out of their own way or weren't getting the help they needed from people close to them.
Yeah, that's probably the most disappointing thing of being a coach is having to deal with something like that. So I mean, you played for 2 college coaches, one guy who is a legend in Virginia and is coaching pro football now. So you leave high school and you go to Christopher Newport, correct?
Yep. So I got to be, I was second team All-State that year. I was a pretty good offensive lineman, but I was 6'1", and I wasn't going to grow anymore. And, I didn't have that 300-pound frame. So I heard from some of those, borderline 1s and 2s, but really wanted to get a good education. And, seeing you was close to home and a chance to get a really good education. So decided to come up here.
And who was the head coach then, and who was your position coach?
Yep. So Matt Kelchner was the head coach all those first 16 years of the program. So I played under him for 4 years and coached, I think, my first 9 years under him. And then Dan Antolik, a guy that was the head coach at Lafayette High School, had been the head coach at Bridgewater, was our offensive line coach. And, again, things coming full circle. I was able to hire him back when I got the head job here. So that's something that's pretty cool. As a guy you played for 4 years is working for you and seeing him in a different capacity.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I know Coach Antolik. I've always been very impressed with him. And then Coach Kelser, coming from Jimmy Laycock tree, that's pretty impressive with all the guys like Mike Tomlin and Lou Holtz coached there, and Marv Levy, which I think Coach Laycock played for both of them, and Coach Jim Cavanaugh. I think he's also alumni of William and Mary, and Sean McDermott. So, and you actually left Christopher Newport and coached at William and Mary, correct, for a little bit?
Yeah, I was always warned by older guys, coaching's a tough profession and you never know when things can happen. And Coach Kelchner decided to retire. He told us in this room I'm in now, right before the season, that this would be his last. And, you got a lot of guys thinking about a lot of different things. And I was fortunate enough to get hired up at William and Mary by Coach Laycock to coach the running backs. And I'd been the offensive coordinator here, calling plays, and he wanted somebody that could help Coach Mangus, who was our offensive coordinator at William and Mary, to help call plays because it was his first time doing it, and he was a little younger than me at the time. So got to go up there and spend 2 years learning under Laycock. And, yeah, he's a legend. He's career wins. He's up there with the best of them. And, Brian Daboll, Dan Quinn, even more names you could add to that list of guys that came through his program and learned from him.
Well, I didn't know that. So Dan Quinn was a position coach, and Daboll, they were position coaches for Laycock?
Yeah, probably mid-'90s around that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very, very impressive, man. So what did you learn from going from, a small college at Christopher Newport to William and Mary's? Not a huge college, but I mean, it's 1AA football, it's FCS. Are there any differences about that?
From a personnel standpoint, I think there's certainly kids at CNU that are D3 players that could have played at William and Mary, but more so at the skill positions. Some really good skill kids we had. The first meeting I had with the offensive line where I got to meet all those guys, I'm just staring up at all of them, and all the defensive ends' arms are dangling. So that's really where I saw the difference, was on the lines from a personnel standpoint. But other than perks of having free Gatorade in the offices and all that kind of stuff, football is football. The X's and the O's. There were guys I worked with at CNU that were probably better than some of the scheme we were going against in coaching, and there are some really good ones. I think it's like that anywhere. There's high school coaches that are better than NFL coaches. I think that's all relative to X's and the O's side of it. And then kids are kids, whether you're giving them a scholarship or whether they're paying their way to school in D3. They want structure, they want discipline, and ultimately they want to trust that you have their best interests at heart and you can make them a better player. So all of that stuff, it doesn't matter if you're Chris Beatty in the NFL or you're at Toano Middle School. It's the same stuff that wins you games.
Yeah. So if anybody's watching and you got a question for Coach, just go to the live stream on YouTube. YouTube.com, Totem Pole Sports, and leave it in there and we'll get it. It's not live streaming on Facebook because I'm still here at school. So, Coach, I always hear, whenever someone says, well, this guy, he's a Division II guy, I kind of like look at that person. I'm like, he's a Division II guy. Like, what does that mean? Like, Pedro Aruza, he told me one time, and if any of y'all watching the other podcasts, I've mentioned this, like, there's the big time and then there's everybody else. Like, I don't know if you can really group a guy. Oh, that guy, he's a Division III guy. He's a Division II guy. He's a 1AA guy. He's a Division I guy. I mean, what is your philosophy on that? Because I hear that all the time. Well, he might be a D2 guy. Like, well, the D2s want D1 guys. So what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I think it always depends on the high school coach. And I've been a recruiting coordinator for a long time here as well. We're just looking for really good football players. And I think, once, if you're not getting a full scholarship to a Division I school, then you really need to look at what's in the best interest of your future, with a full scholarship being off the table and then, probably the NFL being a long shot. Look to where you can get a really good education and where your parents can watch you play and, where the home game atmosphere and all those things are really important. So, sometimes I think kids get caught up in D2 versus D3 when the cost of attendance is going to end up being the same. And sometimes you're further away from home and not getting a great education and playing in front of not great crowds. That was a big draw for me at CNU was once you played in those state championships and regional championships and all those kind of games, you want to play in games that matter in front of big crowds. And, I was fortunate at CNU to play for a bunch of conference championships and play in front of 6,000, 7,000 people that, bluntly at a lot of Division II schools might not have been the case. So, yeah, it's all relative. And I think one of the big things I learned getting into coaching, I assumed recruiting was this. I assumed everyone knew what they were doing in recruiting at the college level, and the longer I've been in it, the more I realized everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes I can't explain things that go on. So, I think to pigeonhole people as a certain thing can really limit their options. And I can't do it right every time. And I've been doing it 15 years. So I think it's tricky.
Yeah. So, if it's a high school coach, I mean, I always feel like when a coach comes in, I mean, if a kid doesn't have any offers, then nothing's off the table. Like, I don't know how some high school coaches do it when y'all come in, like, oh, that guy, he's a Division I guy, but he doesn't have any offers. So, like, I would never limit a kid's opportunity based on the level of the school. And, I mean, when I was at Virginia Union, there was a kid from King William who had a package from Ferrum, and it was some type of grant, and it was like $30K. And I was like, dude, you need to take that. He's like, what? I was like, you need to take that. Like, that's a lot of money. So, like, the NCAA says that Division IIIs can't give scholarships or athletic scholarships. I mean, I think that's almost kind of silly, to say that you're not allowed to give any athletic money. So, like, because I guess the best schools, they get the best players, the best deal. So, like, I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, every program's obviously different. For us, the biggest deal is we're a state school. So the privates, like the Ferrums of the world, their financial aid departments have to get more creative because of the sticker value, price of the school. For us, it's pretty cut and dry that we're not really involved in the financial aid process. But then, we're a high academic school, so we do have some academic-based scholarships that kids can get based off merit. But basically, the rule is we can't do anything for those guys that a regular student would be able to do. So, certainly makes things tougher at our level. But us being a state school, it's usually pretty affordable for most kids. And then, we try to do everything we can in the off season and those kind of things to help supplement the cost.
Okay, right on. So, I mean, do you think that it should stay that Division IIIs? I mean, because I see these kids, like, they're getting better deals because they're a football player, but it's not allowed to be called an athletic scholarship. And there's kids on the internet, I don't want to go play Division III. It's like, come on, man. Like, a Division III school might be cheaper than a Division II or 1AA. Like, basically, you need to go where you're wanted. I mean, have you dealt with that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. They hear D2 and they hear scholarship, but it's not a full scholarship. So it's actually going to be more expensive than going somewhere that's closer to home, is a better education, a more winning program, coaches that really want you there. And, a lot of those times, frankly, you get them on a bounce back because they go 7 hours from home and they're miserable their first semester. And then they kind of realize what you wish they would have realized a little sooner. But I think a big part of that's the parents too. I think parents that are supportive of their kids and just want to see them happy have a tendency to give them better choices. And sometimes the parent that lives vicariously through the kid and feels good about the day he posted on Twitter that he went D2 or he walked on at a 1AA, but that might be the bulk of their college football experience because they don't get to play a lot of football when they actually get there.
Yeah. So you were at William & Mary. You came back to Christopher Newport, correct, as an assistant coach, and then there was a coaching change, and you became the head coach. Can you talk a little bit about that, how all that went down?
Yeah, so Coach Link was the head coach here, and they had some decent years, kind of that 500 range. Brought me back to coach the offensive line, which I was appreciative of. I had some other places, but I was getting married and planning to have kids, and being able to keep my wife close to home was important. And just tried to do the best job I could during that time, coaching my position group and improving the program. Obviously, when it's your alma mater, it means a lot to you. Found out, right after my second year, that was during some of the COVID fiasco too. But found out they were letting everybody else go, and I would get the interim job and possibly have a chance at the job long term. So really, I think the hardest time for me people say, well, what's hard about becoming the head coach? It was the interim time because it was kind of like being substitute teacher. You didn't have a lot of sway until you actually had the authority to do things. So we were trying to hold it together and piecemeal it in recruiting. But once, we got that finished up and we were able to bring a whole staff together, that's when, things took off and were a little bit easier.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about bringing on Coach Antolik, who, coached you. Tell us, like, being a new head coach, how did you feel about your staff? Did you I go to the convention and I see guys just put resumes up on a board, or business cards. I mean, how did you go and fill out your staff?
Yeah.
Was it just randomly you pick guys, or how did you do that, Paul?
No, I think twofold. First off, anybody that I think is worth their salt is going to hire people they know or they have some kind of connection to. When you're, sitting in this chair, you got to feel comfortable with who you have. That either you've worked with them and seen how they are, or you can have it on good authority that they're going to be good coaches. So, posting stuff, when you go to the, urinal and somebody's got something posted, I don't know how often that's really going to get you a job. It's more going to camps, going to clinics, getting to know people that can possibly, allow you to build those opportunities. And, I really learned, we talked about Coach Laycock and his tree. So I really tried to look at him when I was there and see the things he was looking for in coaches. And I had a long conversation when he was retiring where I just wanted to, hit him with a bunch of football questions. And I got, great insights in that 2-hour conversation. But really, it comes down to he wanted to hire people he could trust at the end of the day. That they're in it for the welfare of the student athletes, because if they're not, that'll show up. And then guys that would be have their feet planted where they're at. You're around college football long enough. There's some coaches that are always looking for the next job while they're in their current job. And that always bothered me the wrong way as a competitive person, that wanted to win at the place I was at that time. So I was really looking for guys that fit that motif. And Division III football, well, football in general, but D3 for sure is a developmental brand of football. So I wanted guys that would be at the school 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. The kids would get comfortable with. The high school coaches could have the same coaches coming into the area. I know that's really important when you build a rapport with a coach you trust from a college. So I wanted to find guys that fit that. And, I was fortunate with my coordinators, Craig Smith, who had been at Bridgewater. I had worked with, he grew up with my older brother, so I was comfortable there. Eli Wickland, to what I was just talking about, I'd never actually worked with, but he had worked with Justin Wood, who I played with at CNU, who's up at Richmond. And Wood had said a lot of good things about him and interviewed him and liked what he was doing coming from Hampton-Sydney. And then I was just fortunate to be able to hire a lot of good coaches beyond that were at different points in their career. So, Coach Antolik, 50 years of experience, that was a no-brainer. And he's retired and wanted to come out. And, that was big for me. He's a big Keppa, who was the coordinator at William Mary for 20 years, came on staff. And then, a big one I'm really happy with, Matt McLeod, who had been a coordinator at William & Mary, had been at Clemson, got into high school, head coaching, and then was at Lafayette most recently. The insights he gives me as a guy that's been at the high school level and can see things from a different perspective has been huge. So I wanted people that would stay. I wanted people I could trust and people that have different experiences and different opinions that could, give me a different way of looking at things at times. I think you always don't know what you don't know, right? So yeah. I wanted people that could tell me some of that stuff.
So it must be live and on. It must be live streaming on Facebook. Earl Fisher, who was one of my coaches growing up, he said, another great podcast, Coach. Good information for student athletes. There was another question. Coach can't answer any questions about any student athletes or recruiting, specific kids. He can answer questions, about, X's and O's or his program or what he believes. So, like, if there is a kid listening, Paul, I always tell kids, like, make good grades, be a good kid, and work hard. Like, if you do those things, it's going to work out. Like, what advice would you give those kids out there on signing day that might not have signed a Division I scholarship? Like, what would you say to them?
If you have a determination to play college football, there will be somewhere you can find to do it. You just got to find the right fit for you. And on our end as coaches, to me, the most important recommendation I'm going to get is going to be from your high school coach. I think it's always a little bit of hubris to think you're going to know a kid or you can watch film of a kid and see something the high school coach didn't see. No, the guy that's with them, 40 hours a week or whatever it is going to know the kids through and through. So, if we're not getting good recommendations from the coaches, first off, that's going to kind of be a non-starter. Because for us, I talked about the development side of it. And, the big things for us we always bring up are character and development. So finding the right kids out of high school that are high character kids, bring that in and make that your culture. I don't think you change a culture of a program. I think you bring in a good culture and that becomes your culture. So we're always just looking for really good kids that are going to get good recommendations. And then you got to love football. I think if you want to play in college, you better love the game. In D3, we see a little more of attrition because there's no scholarships. But, even to my time at William and Mary, there were a lot of kids there that didn't love football. They were just continuing to play because they had a scholarship to do it. But I would say sit down and really think if you love the game of football, if you can't live without it, and you want to work to get better, there will always be a place for you. You just got to find the right one.
Yeah, we always say, like, things that you love, you give your time and your attention. So, I mean, if you really love football, you're going to be in the weight room. You're going to be at practice. You're going to be with your team. You're going to be staying out of trouble. So, that's what we kind of hang our hat on as we brought back the Champions Club like Urban Meyer had. They got to have a 3-0. They got to have 80% of off-season workouts, and they got to have no out-of-school or in-school suspensions. I mean, will that get them into Christopher Newport? I mean, can a kid have a 3.0? What's the GPA that they need?
Yeah, we're extremely high academics. So just in general to the student athletes, the higher your GPA, the more options you're going to have. The lower it is, the less options or maybe no options at all. But for us, a 3.0 is the benchmark. So if you're below a 3.0, we really can't even talk to you at that point. Fortunately, most schools now are test optional, which is good because, the SAT was somewhat of a biased test. So if you go to class and do the work and do what you're supposed to do, yeah, you can have an opportunity over a 3.0. If you don't, you're going to be more limited in the options you have for college, and you might end up at a place you're not going to be as happy because you didn't do that work in high school to get yourself into the position you want to be in.
Yeah, I had one of my former players who's a head coach. He texted me and he asked me, he said, "Coach, I got a kid with a 1.6 GPA. Is there anywhere he can go?" I mean, with the 1.6 GPA, I mean, if they're really great, they could probably go to Lackawanna. But there's not many JUCOs on the East Coast. There's some in the Northeast. But, I mean, there's California, which they'll take anybody because it's, pay to play. But then Kansas and those ones down in the South, I mean, those guys are freaks of nature. So, like, a kid that has a 1.6 that really says he wants to play football, is there anything he can do?
No, by that point, your options are non-existent. I mean, maybe you can go the JUCO route and find a path, but having done this a long time, those instances are very, very few and far between. Usually, those guys are going to end up in community college or just going to find a job. And it's something you hate to see because lots of times the kids are plenty smart enough to get the work done. It's just a lack of realization of what messing around your 9th and 10th and 11th grade year is going to cost you when you become a senior.
Yeah, and I mean. With the bigger schools, I mean, they're looking at juniors, and I mean, on a transcript, it's just your freshman, your sophomore years, and then like a kid that's a senior now, they've only got 3 years, so it's not y'all aren't even going by their senior grades. So it's so important that this gets ingrained in them from the beginning. But like there's nowhere for those kids to go that have a 1.6. Like you can go to community college, or I mean, you can't get into a college. So it's just a tough. Like you talked about Devion Simmons, man. I mean, he signed to go to Virginia Tech. I don't know where he ended up going.
He never graduated high school and tried to go to whatever the last chance U down there, but he was 4 years older or whatever. It was never going to happen. But yeah, if he'd done the bare minimum of work, it could have been a lot different story on how his career and how his life panned out.
It makes me think of something Coach Bill Holt told me when I was at Virginia Union. He said, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but he said, "Troy, you could go to every Walmart in the entire country, and you could probably pick guys that could win an NFL playoff game. And I was thinking, I was like, because sometimes it's not always the most talented guy that makes it in pro football. Like Brandon Ross, who played for me, who's a scout for the Green Bay Packers, he barely had a scholarship coming out of high school. I mean, he went to Youngstown State and he played everywhere in the secondary, but he wasn't the most athletic. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the biggest, but he was dependable. So, like, I mean, Devion Simmons, he could have played pro football. So, I mean, do you think that's possible, or is that just a crazy saying?
I don't know if every Walmart in America, maybe certain Walmarts are more talented.
Yeah, I mean, if you had all the Walmarts, everybody that works at Walmart in the entire country, he said that you could put together a team from those guys that could go and win a playoff game. That's how much talent. It's not always the most talented guys, you know?
I mean, yeah, no, and I think it comes back to, again, the love of football, right? I think you find usually the most dependable guys. And you know, I just had a conversation with a player on our roster about this, you know, how do you want to get on the field? Well, I got to trust you, right? And that's, you know, trust comes in a lot of different forms. But typically the kids that love the game, you're going to trust more. And then those guys, you know, find a way to develop and they can become the scrappy guy that, you know, finds a way to make it to the NFL. Or, you know, an example I have from William & Mary, they just graduated a 5-year starter, 2-time team captain, I think one of only a few in the history of the program. And he was a 5'10" kid I recruited out of Norview High School, but he was tough as nails and he competed unlike anybody else I've ever seen. So wasn't the most talented kid by any stretch, but, you know, is going to go down as one of the all-time great stories at William & Mary. So, you know, so much of it's want to, so much of it's desire, so much of it is stuff that's really, really hard to diagnose as a coach until you really get your hands on the kids.
Mm-hmm. So it just makes me think about, it's good having you here and having this conversation, because I've had players before in the past, you know, they're 6 foot, they're 5'11", and they're 220 pounds, but they say they're a linebacker and they're standing on the sidelines. And I look at them and I'm like, dude, like, we need some help at offensive guard. But they don't want to play offensive guard because they don't see on TV a 5'10", 210 pound or 220 pound offensive guard. But I mean, a kid that's a 5'10", 220 pound offensive guard for us that's got good grades, I mean, could you use him at another position, or is that kid just too short to play offensive line? Like, have you ever heard of this, Paul? You probably didn't have that at Lansdowne, but I've had kids that, or is it just because they don't love it enough?
Yeah, no, I think the more coaches ask you to do on high school film, the better it's going to be for your recruitment. So if I see a quarterback that's playing receiver, that's doing running back, he's covering kicks, he's doing everything, then that tells me he's a football player. So when you're looking at defensive ends, if he also started at guard, well, that tells me he's got to be a pretty tough kid. If you see a guy that's, you know, a center and a linebacker, okay, maybe he's an H-back in college. You know, a lot of offenses aren't using those nowadays. You got to get creative in how you search for those positions. So the more you do for your high school team, that tells me your coach trusts you. He thinks pretty highly of you. So, you know, you're able to pick up information. You love the game. So if you're able to do those things in high school, then typically, you know, you're going to have a better chance of being able to do them in college.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because it's so true. I mean, we got 6 people watching right now. If you have any questions, go on Facebook or YouTube and leave a question, and Coach will answer it. But Coach, like, since you became the head coach, we always say on the podcast, and you probably heard this, everybody wants to be the head coach until they're the head coach. So, like, have you ever had that feeling, or have you ever had somebody who they just wanted to be the head coach, and then once they become the head coach, it's like, oh, now what do I do? Like, how do you feel about that saying?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, one of the things I asked Laycock about when I was leaving was, you know, about what he looks, you know, what could have prepared him to be a head coach better. And he basically said nothing prepares you for being a head coach but being a head coach. And being a successful coordinator really has no parallel to being a successful head coach. So I think, you know, for me, it was watching those guys, seeing how they did things, the Chris Beatties, the Matt Kelchners, the Jimmy Laycocks, and taking what you like, taking what you don't like. You know, you're never going to be a carbon copy of those people, but I think you're always should be looking at the position you want to hold and have a plan firmly in place for when you get it. So, I already had my manuals ready for head coaching interviews, and I had, I think a fairly thought out and visualized identity I wanted my football team to have if I was ever given that opportunity. But yeah, it's different when the buck stops at you. It's easy when you're an assistant sometimes to say, I'll do it this way and we'd be winning if we did this or that. But, in this position, for better or for worse, you got nobody to blame but yourself at the end of the day, which, I didn't know how I'd feel about that, but having been in the role now, it's nice if you're a competitive person.
Yeah. So when you went through the interview process, there's so many guys probably watching this or going to watch this that they want to get to college football. Maybe they're a high school coach. They want to get to college football, or, they're a high school coach and they want to be a head coach. Preparing for the interview process and the questions, like, what did you hang your hat on? Was it just what you had done in the job that you were given that got you the job, or was it the interview? And in the interview, what did you hang your hat on?
I think authenticity, again, that'll be a word I keep bringing up, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't trying to be somebody else. I wasn't just taking this Bill Belichick quote and this quote from this guy and hodgepodging them together into something I didn't really believe in. I wanted to make sure that my voice coming through in the interview was authentic to who I was as a person, because if you try to fake it, it's not going to last with the kids, and you probably won't get the job in the first place. And then I think a key word there is vision, right? Having a vision for how you see the program being successful and having a plan of how you're going to implement that vision. And I think it's got to be very structured. If you go in with a million different ideas on how you want to do this different, that different, this different, you're not going to have enough structure and focus on the things that really matter. So having a systematic plan of how you want to change things, and making sure it's clear and concise and people can understand is pretty important.
Yeah. So Kyle Anderson, Coach Bald on Totem Pole Sports, he said, "Great podcast, guys. Coach, growing up before you started coaching, which NFL and/or college coaches were your favorites and why? Thank you from the Sunshine State." Coach, he's in St. Petersburg, and
Okay.
I mean, right near Lakewood High School on the water, Coach.
Yeah,
It's
great
amazing.
area. I used to recruit Florida when I was down at William Mary. It was always a nice week or two to go down there. I think from a coaching perspective, I always respected Frank Beamer. I grew up a Tech fan because they took guys from the 757. They had the Xavier DBs and Daryl Tapps and Vince Halls and all those guys. And, as a young kid from the area, you want to root for the team that has your guys. And I thought they did a phenomenal job of recruiting Virginia kids. So I always, respected the heck out of Frank Beamer and their whole staff as a kid watching them. And then in the NFL, I don't know if I had a single coach, I favored more than the others. But I think I always rooted for the college coaches to be successful when they got to the NFL, because I always hated that, just to what I said, high school coaches can coach in college, that the NFL was so vastly different than college. So I was a big Chip Kelly fan. I liked what he did, and I know it was mixed success in the league. But again, maybe because I was around Beatty, who was innovative and would break conventions, and I think Chip Kelly's, was very much in that mold of not just doing the same old thing because that's always how it's been done, but really questioning why you do certain things, and if you can do it better, do it better.
Yes. So at LC Bird, our principal, we have a great principal, and her thing is like work hard, play hard, take care of each other. And then our vision for our football program is we want kids to, one, we want to change their lives. Two, we want to help get them to the next level, whatever that means, or go, college or trade school, Army, whatever. And then three is build champions for life. So what is your vision for your program?
Yeah. And that was one of those things that was really important. And it's part of the interview when you put that stuff together, right? You go to a million clinics, and we all have, and, this coach has his 10 C's and this coach has the 12 building steps and all that. And I always heard those. And even with some of the coaches I played with or coached under, I thought, they were talked about once in a team meeting to start the year, and were never really had much follow through. Right. So I always thought, if I ever get the opportunity to be a head coach, I want to keep things really, really simple for my kids. I don't want 100 page rule book on, team rules. I wanted it to be things they can really understand. So the same 4 things we really emphasize to our team all the time are our 4 goals, which is graduate. So, academics come first, essentially, is what that one means. The most important one, positive social impacts, which is just be a good person, right? Treat people the right way, live by the golden rule. That covers really all your conduct you can possibly have, being team first, then winning. Those are the main 4 goals we have as a team. And that's more for the off the field side of things with those guys. And then I always thought, again, identity and vision and all that's important. I wanted to make sure our kids knew what their identity was as a football team, period, like how we're going to win games. Because when I haven't been successful certain times, I've always thought we never had something we could just hang our hat on at the end of the day when things weren't going well, or, the ball didn't bounce your way. And really for us, it's specific to the school I'm at because we get certain kinds of kids, but it's disciplined. So Bob Solderich, who I worked with at William & Mary, described it as being great at things that require no talent. And I think everyone knows what discipline entails. Being smart, we get really smart kids. So we ask more of them on the field schematically, and in those 6 days going into a game that we're going to be better prepared and be able to process information faster because we got smarter kids. Tough. I think anybody we recruit, if we're talking to the coaches right, will be physically tough. But for us, it's really about building the mental toughness. It's something today's generation is lacking a little bit of. And I think COVID only, made that worse because kids are given a lot of easy ways out in their lives. So we specifically make things tough on them so that, it carries over into games. And then I think any team I've been on that's been successful really like being around each other. So we talk about being, together. And we do a lot in the off season to manufacture that. So that's how we define ourselves: smart, tough, smart, disciplined, tough, and together. And we'll watch a cut up of about 20 plays each week from a given game where I say, hey, we're doing a great job of being tough, or we're being smart here, or we need to do a better job this way. So the kids are constantly hearing it and seeing that identity come into fruition on the football field.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. And, Mike Tomlin, they say, is like one of the best at that. I mean, he's never had a losing season. He played for Coach Laycock. Have you been able to spend any time with him or talk to Coach Tomlin?
I've met him on a couple of occasions. Pretty cool story was he actually, my last college game, we were playing in the playoffs up at Washington Jefferson College, and 3 inches of snow on the ground. And I guess the Steelers must have had a Thursday night game. And he came to our team hotel Friday before my last game and gave us the speech beforehand. And I mean, it was awesome.
Wow.
It's everything you could expect, right?
Because that was because of Coach Kelser, right?
Yeah, because he had him at William & Mary.
Wow.
And it was a great point, and it stuck with me at the time. It stuck with me to this day. Was once you're in playoff games or you're in games between teams with really not a huge competitive difference between each other, it always comes down to the little things, and that's something we preach a lot with our kids even now.
The teams that make less mistakes. The teams that do what they do better than the other team. It's, like you said, you got to hang your hat on something. You can't be good at everything. And Coach Beatty, he showed that at Lansdowne, and I guess so did Coach Laycock at William & Mary. So talking a little bit about, like, I know when I was a young head coach, I was so caught up on my record and the results. But as I got older, more people told me, Troy, you need to study Saban. Like, he's got it figured out. And like even like Bill Walsh, don't worry about the scoreboard, and Saban, focus on the process. So what has the process been like there at Christopher Newport since you've taken over?
Yeah, it's been trying to change it and adjust it to my personality and how I want the team to be. And, starting out involved getting rid of some guys that didn't necessarily, in my opinion, fit that culture that might have been talented players. But then, building those 4 core tenets we talked about. But, yeah, going into the start of the season, I couldn't have told you how we'd be as a football team, coming off a couple of disappointing years. And, it's funny how you have little things that can be a litmus test of how well you're doing. We had just lost the apprentice school, who had a really good team this year. Lost 2 games in heartbreaking fashion, could have easily won both of them. And we're 1-2, and you wonder, are the kids still bought in, right? Are they believing what you're hearing? And one of our big things about discipline is like the locker room being clean, right? And we have a structured plan for it Monday through Friday. But, Saturday night after a night game, it's 11 o'clock. I didn't have somebody specifically clean the locker room at that time. But sure enough, that next morning I walked through the locker room at 7 a.m. to start watching film on Sunday, and the seniors had found a way to make sure everybody cleaned it up and it was spotless. And people think I'm crazy and the kids laughed at it, but I knew they were still bought in when that was still going on. And you're not sure where you're at. Then we went on a great run and won 6 in a row after that, and I don't think those two things are unrelated. That tells me a lot about how we're building the program, is how the kids are reacting to difficult situations. So that to me, more than wins and losses at the time, was pretty emblematic of where we were as a program.
Yeah. So, I mean, the guys take pride in what they're doing. They take pride in their locker room, and it shows they care. And they've listened to what you've been preaching. And then your assistant coaches, all of y'all on the same page. Have you ever been on a staff where people, you don't have to say what school it is or anything, but have you been on a staff where people weren't on the same page? And what was that like? And you don't have to get specifics, but what was it? Give us an example of.
Yeah, I've been on a staff where the offensive minds, I describe it as always trying to be the smartest person in the room, right? So, any conversation, I can come up with a reason to do or not to do something. And, for lack of a better term, a pissing match, right? You become a pissing match to see who can be right on a given subject. And it became very adversarial as a staff. And kids are really perceptive. They're not dumb. And they pick up on it. And once they pick up on it, it's over. So I've been a part of a staff like that. A, it's not a lot of fun to come to work every day when that's what's going on. And B, you're not going to be very successful. So, staff chemistry, again, when I was choosing my staff, was very, very important to me that we had the right guys that would fit in well together and not have a lot of egos and all be invested in the same thing, which at the end of the day was, helping the kids be successful and trying to win games.
That makes me think of Coach Holt, who was a college coach at Shawan and coached me at Virginia Union. The hardest question to answer, one of them in a football interview, is, give me a time when there was a conflict or a disagreement with the superior. Like you're the line coach and the offensive coordinator wants to do it one way. Like how was that handled? And, Coach Holt, he told me the answer. He said, I have disagreements and conflicts all the time because, I don't want to be a yes man. But at the end of the day, when we decide this is how we're going to do it, like I'm all in and I'm a good soldier and I'm going to do it that way. So like these disagreements in the offensive staff, I mean, was that stuff that could have been figured out in the off season? Like, hey, this is how we're going to run inside zone, or hey, this is how we're going to run power. Or was it more of a game plan or week by week thing that was the disagreements, or was it everything in between?
It was more so. I don't know that stuff that could have been corrected in the off season. I think it was the normal, disagreements on how to win a game, how to attack a defense, whatever it might be. And there's a million different ideas for any given game plan that are good. From an offensive perspective, it's more so how do you marry those things up to be a successful, coherent game plan, right? And if everyone's not on the same page with how you're trying to build that thing, then you're going to have 5 different chefs in the kitchen and not end up with a good product. So I think what you have to do as a staff, and, something Coach Kelchner used to say a lot when I worked here, is he wanted everybody to speak up in the meeting rooms, but once you left the meeting room, everyone was on the same page and the same message was going through to the kids. And I just think that's incredibly important. I had one time, and, I'll talk about a time in my career I didn't do a great job. 2014, a guy named Ed Davis was 2013 maybe. Ed Davis, Fast Eddie, some people know him as, was our offensive coordinator. He was a great guy. He was like my mentor. He ended up passing in the middle of the season from.
Do you have his trick play DVD?
Oh yeah, I do.
It's the greatest. I was going to put it on YouTube, dude, but I was like, nah, I don't want to put it. It's the greatest trick play DVD of all time, man.
Yeah, he loved that stuff. He, when he was at Northeastern going against Syracuse and all that stuff. But I got to call plays when I was 25 years old, however old I was the rest of that season. And Mike Farragelli came in the next year, and I learned a ton from him. And once he left, I thought, great, I should be the quarterback's coach. I should be the offensive coordinator, all those things. And Kelchner didn't give it to me at the time. And, I wasn't directly defiant about it, but I was kind of being a little pissy, in the meetings. And Kelchner called me in and basically said, look, I know you're disappointed, but you need to act differently about it. And, that was the one time in my career I wish I would have handled something a little bit differently, where I let the disappointment of where my career was going get in the way of what was in the best interest of the coaching staff and the team.
So he was just able to pick up on that because of your body language and because he knew you.
Yep, he knew me and knew I was acting a little different than I normally would.
Yeah.
And everything comes full circle. I had to have a conversation with one of our running backs this year who got beat out by a more talented kid who I love. But he was doing kind of the same thing I was doing, and I had to have that same conversation. And, it's nice when you can have a relevant example you've been through yourself.
Yeah. So, that's a gift, man, to be able to see yourself in your players and to have the emotional intelligence to understand, why you felt the way you felt, but also be able to recognize that in others. I guess that's why, you're a head coach. How old are you now, Coach?
35.
Okay, so you're 35 and you're a college head coach. I mean, was that your plan, to be a head coach at this age?
No. My plan was always to try to coach at the highest level possible, but do a great job at the place I was at, right? I wasn't, and I'm not naturally that person that's going to, always be phone calling about the next job. And, probably sometimes early in my career to my detriment, where I spent a lot of time at the same places. But I think people see that eventually, that you're really good at the job you're in, and, Lord willing, give you the opportunity to advance into another role. So I didn't have a specific plan for it, but I will say I was always preparing for the eventuality one day of maybe becoming a head coach. And that preparation, helped me get the job now.
Yeah. So as the head coach, you have a defensive coordinator. Do you have an offensive coordinator, or do you call the plays? How do you delegate that?
That was one of the hardest decisions I felt like I had to make when I got the job. Because being an offensive coordinator was the most fun I ever. Calling plays on game day was the most fun I've had as a coach, because you kind of get those feelings of like you're playing again, right? You're nervous before the game. You're thinking through stuff. I really enjoyed those 2 years. So, obviously when you become the head guy, you get the choice whether to do that or not. But ultimately, I always felt like sometimes places I'd been, there wasn't enough talk and cohesion throughout the week between offense, defense, and special teams. You just sequestered off to your rooms, came up with your game plans, but there was never a lot of talk about how to win the game holistically, right? And I wanted to be able to do that as a head coach. So I felt like in order to game manage, see everything going on, having to call plays from the field for the first time in my career might have been putting too much on my plate. And that's something I talked to Coach Laycock about in that interview I talked about as well with him. So hired Craig Smith to call the offense, but obviously, a lot of it's the stuff I like and the vision I have. And then, I get to coach the quarterbacks, which that relationship's, incredibly important. And I wanted to have my hand in that.
So, there's probably a high school coach out there. It's kind of like rec coaches want to go to high school coaches want to go to college guys want to go to the pros, and pro guys want to go back to high school. But like, what would you say to the high school coaches out there, like that were able to move up, like Coach Antolik? What advice would you give them? Because I'm sure there's some guys out there watching like that.
Yeah, it's all about relationships. When you get to this chair and you're looking to hire people to work for you, it's going to have to be people you have a relationship with and people you trust. And that doesn't, don't be a phony person about it. People can see through that too. That was something Coach Beatty always talked to me about. And you kind of know what I'm talking about, the guy that's chatting you up, but it's not very authentic. So, reach out to college coaches you have a relationship, or try to build one through camps or however method you can. You never know when, a job opens up somewhere else that person knows you now and they can give a phone call to. That's how, 9/10 of these jobs happen. So, do a great job with the job you're doing, and then try to network, try to get to know people. That's really what this business, probably unfortunately is really about.
Yeah. I don't know if the guy's going to be watching this or not, but I had a guy text me, he was texting, hadn't heard from him about 4 years, but he's texting me. And he's like, do you know so-and-so? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, can you text him for me? Like, I mean, I know the guy. I have his number, but, like, I ain't never coached with him. Like, does that really help? Like, to get a guy who maybe knows a guy to text somebody for you his resume? I mean,
No, it's a long shot at best. It's a long shot. It's got to usually be a 1-to-1, or it's got to be, hey, like Coach Antolk, I played for him. I really trust him. If he had a name he wanted to bring up, I can trust in his evaluation that he's done it before. But if it's secondhand or 6 degrees of separation kind of deal, it's more than likely not going to happen. Or you're going to a bad situation, and that's why that job's open to begin with.
Yeah. So I have not seen y'all play at Christopher Newport, but if somebody watches y'all's team, like Coach Bland, my defensive coordinator, his daughter visited there. She's a field hockey player, but he was like, man, he played at WVU when they lost to Notre Dame in the national championship. He played for Coach Nealon, but he was like, man, it's like a D1 atmosphere. That's what he told me. He's like, it's a D1 atmosphere at Christopher Newport. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, because I was like, wow, man. He was so impressed by that. And then what would we see on the field on offense and defense from, a Paul Crowley, Christopher Newport team?
Yeah. First off, from the atmosphere perspective, we're fortunate. We're 5,000 students, a little above. So we're bigger than a lot of D3 schools. And we get really good crowd support. We get 6,000 people at some of the home games. And it's a fairly confined stadium, so it feels full, right? You play at that old Richmond City Stadium, and it feels empty as heck. I think that's a part of it. And then we got a 200-person pep band. So, the band's playing. It's grass field. It just feels like college football is supposed to feel like. So,
it's important. I mean, it's important.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, it's been better in some of the games I coached at William & Mary, to be honest, when we weren't doing very well. And then just on the field, I think any good coaching staff's going to adapt to the players you have. I think if you have a rigid system that's inflexible and your kids can't do it, you're setting yourself up to not be successful, right? But big picture, I think in college football, in my opinion, offensively, you got to have a quarterback that can move. For the design runs when you get into the red zone or gaining the +1 advantage. And then B, just to be able to make plays outside of structure. It's so hard in modern college football to just line up on 3rd and 9, drop back to that same spot where the defense knows you're going and try to get the ball off. They got to be able to be a little bit improvisational. And we're fortunate we got a kid, Matt Dezersky, that won a state championship at South County that can do a lot of those things. And then I think, skill-wise, you want to find ideally those versatile guys. In a perfect world, I'd love to be 12 personnel. Like the Patriots were in their prime, where those tight ends could line up and empty and run routes, or they could line up in a power set and kick your butt. Because, football in general, you still got to be able to run the football on offense to be successful. And then defensively, you're always going to build it around what you got. But I think scheme versatility is important. As a former offensive lineman, as a former O-line coach, if you're just lining up in a 3-down or just lining up in a 4-down, unless you just got dudes, you're making it easy for us as an O-line. So I think, being able to show different looks to the line and confuse them defensively is important. And we had some deficiencies on the D-line. So we went to some of the 3-3 stack stuff to try and really just hide some of those deficiencies our first year and try to recruit the defensive linemen to be able to be more versatile there.
So in the off season, is there anything in particular that y'all are studying? Not giving anything away, but I know like the 3 safety defense, that's the big deal with TCU. And I guess offensively, I mean, Georgia with, the 2 tights. I mean, I don't know who can find tight ends like those 2 guys they got, but like, what is it that y'all are going to be looking at?
Yeah, I think it's different on offense and defense. And really, because of the recruiting cycle for us, we've been really heavy into that. So now is just when I'm able to start watching the cut-ups again from last year and all that. But I think the biggest advice I got, and Beatty said it when he was first coaching, he said he hated people that just say, yeah, I know football. Because football is always changing. What's working 10 years ago isn't working now, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to just be on the cutting edge of things as best you can, but not sacrifice your ultimate identity to just be picking things here and there from different places. Offensively, I'd like to incorporate a little bit more of some under center run game that you're kind of seeing in the NFL, and we're going to study some couple things there.
Why do they still go under the center in the NFL?
the run game's more effective. The back has a better, easier path. I think pistol somewhat accomplishes the same thing. And then, it's just different defensively to have to defend, right? Like defensive ends, when it's always gun, you can cheat off the back alignment. You can do a lot of different things there. Whereas you have a multitude of options in the run game from under center. Then they're all incorporating some of the speed sweep stuff with it, the jet sweep stuff from under center, where some of that's even the read. You have a choice pre-snap, and we're doing some of that this year. And I think it's just something a lot of defenses don't see in college, and can give us an advantage there.
So defensively, who do you think is cutting edge?
I mean, the 3 safety stuff is pretty good. If you can stop the run in it, that's a big caveat. But it makes it hard as a quarterback's coach because so much is middle field open, middle field closed, or 1 high, 2 high reads. And when you got those 3 safeties back there, it muddies the picture a lot. So if you can stop the run in that defense, I think it really complicates things offensively. When I wanted to be a head coach, I said I always wanted to do the things that other teams did that I hated. So like going for it on 4th down, on 4th and 1, like we've been really aggressive with it because when we were playing other teams, I always felt like they were going to get it on 4th and 1, and whenever they punted, I was breathing a sigh of relief. So I think offensively and defensively, you see what other people struggle with and try to implement that. I heard the same thing from in one of those game broadcasts that the TCU coordinator was a guy Dykes had played against in previous years and struggled with defensively. So I think you're always trying to do those things.
Yeah. So we've already been talking for an hour, Coach. Can you believe that? An hour, man.
No, it's nice to talk ball.
And we're not media guys,
Yeah,
so,
no, I'm not the guy that likes to hear myself talk. Trust me.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on, Coach. What would you like to leave the clinic with? Like, what would you like to say to the guys or any coaches out there? And then, how can they get in contact with you? But like, what would you like to leave the clinic with, telling these guys watching?
Just that I'm appreciative of football in the state of Virginia and high school football in particular. I grew up, like I said, idolizing Vince Hall and Xavier Debe and all those guys that were a little older than me. And, I watched Coach Beatty at Salem with my brother and was just in awe of the offense they were running. And it was the main reason I wanted to do this was my high school football experience and all that entailed. So just an appreciation for all you guys and what you do. And, I think we're really fortunate as a state that there's a lot of good ball coaches. But more so, there's a lot of good coaches that are doing it for the right reasons. I've gone in high schools occasionally where I thought they were off, but for the most part, they're good people doing good things for the right reason. And, I appreciate it because there's not a lot of places left in this world like football where you're bringing different people together that might have different beliefs. It was pretty cool on one of my recent recruiting trips where I went everywhere from Norfolk to Northern Virginia to Franklin County, way out in the western part of the state. And, those are vastly different experiences and cultures and ways of growing up, but football is kind of that thing that always unites them. And I just appreciate that so much. So just a thank you to those guys. And, we're a pretty open book here. So, if anybody wants to come watch a spring practice or even just come up to talk football, as we progress more into the summer months, we got guys that were just doing high school. So we'd love to pick your brains and learn something too, because, everybody can learn something from somebody else.
Yeah, no doubt, Coach. So thank you for coming on the Championship Football Coaches Clinic, Coach. And we'll have you back on here soon. But thank you, brother.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.